Welcome, everyone. We are going to be looking at, we're still on different types of tissue. In a previous video, we covered epithelium. In this video, we're going to be looking at connective tissue. And then we will move on to muscle tissue and nerve tissue. So this is the second type called connective tissue. Now remember, with epithelial tissue, it was made up of a bunch of cells that were closely packed together. In this case, we're looking at simple cuboidal, and now if I add another layer, stratified cuboidal. But notice the cells are closely packed together. We have very little extracellular matrix. In comparison to connective tissue, where it consists of widely spaced cells that are separated by protein fibers and a ground substance called the matrix, which is the extracellular matrix. So maybe we have a cell here, and then we have a larger cell with a larger nucleus here, and then we have, let's say, a red blood cell here. They're far apart, and there's lots of matrix and protein fibers between. That's connective tissue. But it's also the most abundant and variable tissue within the body. And it's got some unique functions. One of them is that it's going to connect organs to each other, right? Connective tissue can connect organs to each other. And it can even connect the epithelium to the rest of the body. It gives support and protection through physical barriers as well as immune barriers. When we talk about immunity, I think of white blood cells. White blood cells, like your antibodies, part of your immune system. It's involved in the storage of energy and heat production, primarily because of fat cells. We call fat cells adipose or adipocytes. Adipocytes or adipose both refer to fat. Okay. And connective tissue can also move and transport materials because of blood. Blood is connective tissue. It's just liquid connective tissue. So some of the characteristics of connective tissue, most connective tissue is highly vascular. When we say vascular, we're talking about blood vessels. Lots of blood can go to them, rich blood supply. There are a few exceptions to that. Cartilage, tendons, and ligaments have a poor blood supply. They're poorly vascularized, not the best blood supply. So when cartilage and tendons and ligaments get injured, it takes a longer time for them to heal because they're not getting enough blood. Blood carries oxygen, glucose, nutrients that are needed to help these tissues heal. So when you stretch a ligament beyond its normal anatomical limits, we call that a sprain. That's a sprain, whenever you stretch a ligament beyond its anatomical limit. Now, what's a ligament? A ligament goes from one bone to another bone. So B for bone. And I'll put an L right here because ligaments go bone to bone. They hold them in alignment. Tendons, well, let's say here's the elbow joint with the elbow bent. And let's say here's the biceps muscle. The biceps are going to attach right here to the part of the arm. Where it attaches, that is a tendon. So muscles go from a bone to another bone, but the way muscles attach to bones are by way of tendons, right? A muscle doesn't attach itself to a bone. It has this connective tissue layer called a tendon. Whenever muscles or tendons are stretched beyond their anatomical limit, we call it a strain. Easy way to remember the difference between strains and sprains is strain has a T, so does tendon. And tendons are an extension of muscle. So if you stretch a muscle or tendon beyond their anatomical limit, we call it a strain. When you stretch a ligament beyond its anatomical limit, we call it a sprain. Okay? So sprains and strains take a long time to heal because they have poor blood supply, and cartilage has poor blood supply. Now, we're going to be looking at connective tissue, and let's look at the three main categories. So the three main categories of connective tissue are going to be connective tissue proper, supporting connective tissue, and fluid tissue. Now, when we look at fluid connective tissue, we're talking primarily about blood, right? We talk about blood, I'm thinking about red blood cells, which carry hemoglobin and oxygen, and then we're talking about white blood cells for your immune system. So that's fluid connective tissue. When I think of supporting connective tissue, I think, hey, what supports the human body? What is its framework? Well, the supporting connective tissue is going to be bone and cartilage. And when we talk about bone, I'm going to be focusing on compact bone and its unique characteristics. When I talk about cartilage, I'm going to talk about these three flavors down here: hyaline cartilage, elastic cartilage, and fibrocartilage. It's just three different types of cartilage. Okay? And the last type is called connective tissue proper, which has two subcategories. We have loose and dense. And under each of those, under loose connective tissue, we have these three flavors: areolar, adipose, and reticular. And under dense connective tissue, we have, we'll focus primarily on regular and irregular, but there's also elastic. So these next few slides that I'm going to be going through are going to be covering these three, right? Connective tissue proper, supporting, and fluid. So here's connective tissue proper, which we'll talk about. Then we have the dense connective tissue proper. Right here is loose. This was A. This is dense, which is B. And then there was, remember, elastic. Then we'll talk about fluid connective tissue. We're talking about blood. And then we'll talk about supporting connective tissue. We'll talk about cartilage, and then we'll also talk about bone. Okay, so that's the general flow. But you do need to know this. This has shown up in the past on the Connect lab reviews, McGraw-Hill lab reviews. So you want to be able to understand this flow chart. Again, connective tissue proper, supporting connective tissue and fluid. Under fluid connective tissue, there's blood, red blood cells and white blood cells. Under supporting, we're thinking about bone and cartilage. We'll break those down. And under connective tissue proper, loose and dense, we're going to break that down. Let's look at connective tissue proper first. We'll look at loose connective tissue. We have those three subunits: areolar, adipose, and reticular. Areolar is going to provide the padding that separates your skin from the deeper tissues, right? So if you pinch your lateral forearm, you're pinching your skin, but you can't pinch the muscle that's deep to it. And that's due to this areolar layer, the padding that separates the two. And it's made up of elastic and collagen fibers. These are protein fibers, collagen and elastic. Collagen is more for strength, and elastin or elastic gives the tissues more of its elastic, flexible stretchability qualities, if you would. Adipose, also known as adipocytes, adipocytes. So adipose, these are our fat cells. And a fat cell looks like a squamous cell, right? A squamous cell looks like that with a nucleus in the center. whereas a fat cell looks very, very similar, but the nucleus is in the periphery. That's the difference. The nucleus is off to the side of the cell. Um, Adipose or fat cells also increase in number until the time of puberty. And that's why body composition is so very important. You want to make sure that you have healthy body composition at the time you hit puberty. The more fat cells you have, the more challenging it is to manage one's weight as they get older. Adipose cells can hypertrophy, they can increase in size, or they can atrophy and decrease in size. Reticular is going to provide the framework to help support a lot of our organs. It's the inner workings of the organs. Under dense connective tissue, there's dense regular connective tissue, and then dense irregular. Dense regular is when we have these collagen fibers that are densely packed and they're parallel to one another, like this. They're densely packed collagen fibers. And it's important that these are all kind of linear, moving in the same direction, because tendons and ligaments need to have that. So dense regular connective tissue, we're thinking tendons and ligaments, they move in the same direction. The collagen fibers are all aligned. Whereas in dense irregular, which is in the skin, but in the dermis, the deeper layer, you may have one collagen fiber this way, another fiber this way, another fiber this way. The fibers are not parallel, they're irregular. And this makes sense because if you've ever been to a licensed massage therapist or an LMT and they do soft tissue manipulation, they can massage your skin and stroke in different directions, not just up and down or left and right. They can manipulate in a variety of directions due to the direction of these fibers being interwoven in so many different directions. Elastic connective tissue, just as it sounds, elastic, we'll find these in certain ligaments, especially those of the vertebral column, where we have 24 freely movable vertebrae. The vertebrae, the way they interlock with one another, they're very stable. The vertebrae are very, very stable, but your spine is very flexible, right? You can flex, you can extend, you can rotate, you can laterally bend. The spine is very flexible, so we need ligaments going from bone to bone that allow for that flexibility. We need more of that elastic tissue there. Okay. Okay, fluid connective tissue. We're going to focus on blood. Um, Blood, we think of red blood cells and white blood cells. Red blood cells are known as erythrocytes. White blood cells, leuco means white, so leukocytes are white blood cells. These are involved in helping to fight infections, whether they be bacterial or viral. And then we have platelets that help us stop bleeding because they create a clot, blood clot. So red blood cells are going to carry gases like oxygen and carbon dioxide and even nitric oxide. Nitric oxide helps to dilate and open up blood vessels, which help to lower our blood pressure. Okay, but when people have damaged LDL cholesterol, if it's oxidized cholesterol, oxidized, which is damaged cholesterol, right? People know the LDL is the bad cholesterol, which is not true, but it could be bad if it becomes oxidized. But we need LDL cholesterol to produce progesterone and testosterone or sex hormones. But if they become oxidized, let's say you eat fried foods and you have too much high sugar in your diet, or you smoke and you drink alcohol, the LDLs become oxidized and they impair nitric oxide. And if nitric oxide becomes impaired or blocked or inhibited, then your blood vessels can't dilate and you get high blood pressure. That's pretty neat, right? Lymph is the interstitial fluid that's just found between the cells of the human body. That interstitial fluid is going to enter lymph vessels, right? And then you have lymph nodes as well. Okay, what is the supporting connective tissue? Cartilage. Remember what we said about cartilage? Bad blood supply. It's not vascular, it's avascular. Whenever you put the letter A in front of something, it means without. So cartilage is avascular. Now, the three main types well, let's look at the cartilage cell first. The cartilage cell is what we call a chondrocyte, a chondrocyte. Now, the three main types of cartilage are hyaline cartilage. This is the most common type. We find it at the end of the bone surface, and where two bones come together, they form a joint. This is the type of cartilage that is involved in degenerative joint disease, also known as osteoarthritis, which is your wear and tear arthritis. It's not the same thing as rheumatoid arthritis. Degenerative joint disease, aka osteoarthritis, is when the hyaline cartilage is breaking down due to some mechanical imbalance in the joint. The second type is elastic cartilage. We need elastic cartilage for flexibility. Okay, you'll have some elastic cartilage along the spinal ligaments. We have elastic cartilage in parts of the ear where we have the eustachian tube. We have some elastic cartilage in the back of the throat, where we have a very important type of cartilage that's designed when you swallow food, that epiglottis that's there to close off the windpipe so that food doesn't go down or water doesn't go down the wrong pipe. And then we have fibrocartilage. Fibrocartilage is the strongest cartilage in the body. It is a shock absorber. So the intervertebral discs, the IVD, the discs between each vertebra, is fibrocartilage. Even the meniscus is fibrocartilage, the meniscus in the knee. You have a medial meniscus and a lateral meniscus of the knee. Those are fibrocartilage. So this has shown up in the past as like a drag and drop on some of the McGraw-Hill Connect lab quizzes. So what type of cartilage is composed of a network of branching elastic fibers, right? Never use the word in the definition. So elastic cartilage has elastic fibers. Now, fibrocartilage is the strongest cartilage, so it's thick. Hyaline cartilage is the one that's most commonly degenerated in degenerative joint disease. So these are thinner, right? They do not form thick bundles. These are both made up of collagen, but fibrocartilage is made up of type 1 collagen fibers, whereas hyaline cartilage is type 2. And the way you remember it is that in a dictionary, the letter F comes before H. So because F comes first, that's type 1 collagen fiber, and the H comes after, which is type 2 collagen fibers. Collagen is really important. Collagen is found not just in cartilage, it's found in skin, hair, nails, blood vessels, bones. It's a really important type of protein. Many people that want to try and keep healthy blood vessels and healthy skin, hair, and nails, most of the hair, skin, nail formulations have collagen within it. This has shown up in the past. Let's just take a look. What is the highlighted structure? When you look at this highlighted structure, these, not the highlighted ones, but these little things here, those are actually chondrocytes. Okay, those are cartilage cells. But the blue stuff is matrix, right? It's the extracellular matrix between the cells. So it's the matrix of hyaline cartilage. Cartilage cells typically look like these raindrops. That's what cartilage cells look like, those raindrops. Okay, we're still on supporting connective tissue. We're going to look at bone. And when we talk about bone, there's a few terms I'd like for you to review and make sure you study. They're important clinically. When you're getting into healthcare, there's a condition that we call osteoporosis or osteopenia. And it really comes from the imbalance between cell type number 1 and cell type number 2, the osteoblasts and osteoclasts. The osteoblasts and osteoclasts are two types of cells that need to work in harmony together, in balance, in perfect check. Osteoblast forms bone, it's going to lay down matrix, whereas the osteoclasts are going to break down bone. They dissolve parts of the bony matrix. So the B in osteoblast for building up bone, and then the C for like see you later, it's going to break it down. So you want to build up bone and break it down, build up, break down, build up, break down, build up, and break down at the same pace. If you're breaking down faster than you're building up, well, that's what osteoporosis is. So you want to make sure that these two are coupled very, very nicely. Now, when we look at bone, especially compact bone is formed in structures called osteons. Okay. Now, osteons are a group of osteocytes that are arranged in concentric lamellae. Now, concentric lamellae look like this. They look like you cut a tree down in half, and when you're looking down in it, you have all these concentric rings. Once you see all of these concentric rings, that's actually going to be an osteon also. And an osteon has a central canal, which is that little hole that I did with that red dot in the center, that's going to have blood vessels in it. We know that bone is vascular. If you break a bone, bones can actually bleed. Okay, so we have osteocytes and osteoblasts. Now what happens is, let's say this is a cell right here, and this is an osteoblast. Now an osteoblast is going to form matrix, right? So it's going to be pushing out from itself calcium fibers, calcium salts, hydroxyapatite. So it's pushing out all of this matrix, this extracellular matrix. And when this matrix is pushed out, the osteoblast gets trapped, right? Because the calcium salts, think of it as cement. If you pour cement, eventually cement's going to harden and dry. So the osteoblast that's pushing out the cement, which is the matrix, it's going to harden. And when it does, that osteoblast is going to get stuck in this cavity. That cavity is called a lacunae. It's called a lacunae. I'll show you on the next slide. And the osteoblast is no longer called an osteoblast. Now it's evolved from an osteoblast into an osteocyte. So right here in this picture that I drew, right in the middle, the blue thing was an osteoblast. But it produced a matrix and it calcified. The red shell going around it is the cavity that it's now trapped in. That cavity is called a lacunae. So right here is a lacunae. The red dot is the osteocyte, right? It was an osteoblast, but it evolves into an osteocyte. The lacunae is the black shell, the cavity that it's stored in. And then you have all these little canals, these extensions coming off of it that are called canaliculi. The canaliculi are these channels, these little passageways through the matrix that are used for the diffusion of nutrients and waste products. They're little canals. Okay. The term periosteum and endosteum are important as well. Let's take a look at bone here. So let's say right here we're looking at, this looks like femur. This looks like your thigh bone. And when we look at it, we see that there's compact bone and there's spongy bone. So this portion here, all of this stuff on the outer part here on both sides, all of that is compact. So all of this here is compact bone, even on this side. This is all compact bone. And what's in the middle is very spongy. So we're focusing on the compact bone. Now, when we look at compact bone, we see that right here in the center, that's the central canal, which is where you have blood vessels. We also see that each of these are concentric lamellae. All of these, this is a concentric lamellae. Going around here, concentric lamellae. Going around here, another concentric lamellae. Those are concentric lamellae. Going around the entire bone, we have circumferential lamellae. These are these going around here, going around the entire bone. But what makes up the osteon, this is one full osteon, are just lots of concentric rings. You have the central canal, and all of these are different osteons. Each of these is an osteon. You only find osteons in compact bone. You don't find osteons in spongy bone. You only find them in compact bone. The other thing is that the outer part, this layer here that looks like that sky blue, this portion here is the periosteum. It's the outer layer of bone, whereas the inner layer of bone is called the endosteum. So you have an endosteum here, the inner part of the bone where that spongy bone is, and then the outer part is the periosteum. The periosteum, that's where ligaments attach, that's where tendons attach. They attach to the periosteum. Notice that bone is vascular. There's blood vessels here. So when bones break, you can form a pooling of blood called a hematoma. A hematoma is just a tumor of blood. Years ago, it's got to be 20 years ago or so, I had a little jet ski accident and my knee ended up hitting the hull of my jet ski. And when it did, it actually, I got these microfractures in the distal part of my femur and tore parts of the vastus medialis muscle, one of my quadricep muscles. And I just felt my heartbeat in my knee. And the heartbeat was every time my heart was beating, the blood was pooling in the knee. It was called a hematoma. I drove myself to the radiologist and had them take a X-ray of my knee and an MRI of my knee to make sure, I knew how to help repair myself from what was damaged. And there was a hematoma on the report, which is a pooling of blood. When blood vessels break, you're going to get a black and blue, right, in the bone. Okay, this is just a model of a bone, and it shows here, number one, that's spongy bone. Number two, that's compact bone. Okay. The outer part of the bone is called the periosteum. Number three, that's the periosteum. Number six are the osteons. So let's say right here, this whole thing is an osteon. And remember, those osteons are made up of those concentric lamellae. Number seven is made up of concentric lamellae right there. Looks like the wedding cake, right? All those different layers. Okay, let's move on here. So what are we looking at here? Once we see a tree, looks like a tree that was cut down, we know that this entire structure is going to be an osteon. Okay, let's look at the choices. Is it a lacunae? Well, lacunae are going to be those black shadows, those hollowed out shadows. Those are lacunae. Central canal, right there in the middle is the central canal where the blood vessels are. Canaliculies, really hard to see, but the canaliculies would be those, you know, those, let's say this was the cell, those spider-like extensions creating these little canals. Those are canaliculies, okay, spider-like looking. And then lamellae, each of these rings going around is going to be a lamellae. So it's not that, it's not that. What we're left with, the whole structure is an osteon. Now here, now we're pointing to these hollowed out chambers, right? What's the blue matrix? So that's going to be the lacunae. The lacunae is where the osteoblast was, but after it calcified, right after the osteoblast produced all of its matrix, it gets trapped in itself called a lacunae, and now it's called an osteocyte. So the osteoblast becomes an osteocyte. Okay, we'll take a break here. When we come back, we'll talk about the three types of tissues.